Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be working on this simple end grain chopping board. As you can see, I've already put a couple of miles on this one and it's performing really well. So for this one we're going to be using a mixture of Tasmanian blackwood and chestnut. So we're going to start off by cutting our boards down to 900mm or 36 inches. So now we'll run it through the joiner to get 2 square reference sides to keep everything nice and square. And now off to the planer. We need to bring all these boards down to the same thickness so that we can get a nice parallel board in the glue up. So now we want to get these ripped down into 11 32mm wide pieces, or 1.5 inches, to end up with a 350mm or 14-inch panel. So for me, when it comes to choosing the size of the chopping board, I always try to choose my chopping board about 1.5 times the length of the blade of the knife I use most frequently. Now I use 9-inch blade, so 14 inches comes out at about where I want it to be. Now we've got our wood all milled up. Blackwood can have a lot of natural colour gradients, so in this one I've tried to arrange it from lightest to darkest, with the lightest chestnut at one end going into the darkest pieces of blackwood. So once we've got the grain orientation and a pattern that we like on the ends, it's time to rotate all the pieces a quarter of a turn. And now that we've got all those flipped up, it's time to add the glue. We're using Titebond 3 as it's water resistant and should keep this thing together for years to come. So with the glue brush, we're going to spread this all out, make sure we hit every tiny little bit of this surface. We need to make sure we hit every tiny little bit, because if we leave any nooks and crannies, it's just going to leave somewhere for bacteria and moisture to sit. Now we need to get all these rolled back over into where they were originally, going back to the original grain orientation that we started with. This is where all our hard work pays off from doing our jointing, ripping down nice and square. We can see we've got one nice even layer, making the job a lot easier when it comes to the next step. And with a good tap down, it's time to leave this one overnight to set up. Okay, so we've let it sit overnight. It's all glued up, dried. Now we're going to run it through the drum sander. Alright, so we're out of clamps. Now you don't necessarily need a drum sander for this job. You could feed this board back through your planer. For me, I prefer to use my drum sander for this task. It's a little bit slower than the planer, but I get less snipe and it gives me a really nice glue ready surface. As we start to get rid of all that muck and bring everything down to the same level, you can see a really nice gradients between the blackwood on the right and the chestnut on the left. And now to cut the pieces to expose the end grain. After cutting these pieces into strips, we're going to rotate them 90 degrees and stand them up on end, which will expose the natural grains in the timbers and give us that really nice look that you get from an end grain chopping board. You may wonder why I took this perfectly good board and cut it into end grain. An end grain chopping board will offer a lot more life to your knife's edge, making it dull a lot less quickly. It will also has its own antibacterial properties that is self-cleaning in its own right. So we're looking for a finished height of 45mm or 1.75 inches, but we need a little bit of room to sand this down after we've done our next glue up. So I'm cutting these pieces at 50mm or 2 inches wide to give us plenty of room to sand down the chopping board at the end and bring it down to our target of 45mm. Okay, so we've got all the pieces cut. Now it's time to arrange the pattern in the way that we like. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to slightly offset these pieces to give it a little bit more natural gradients. So I'm going to go through that now and adjust them through when I do the glue up. So for the final glue up, all we need to do is lay these pieces out so that we can expose the surface that we're going to be applying the glue to. We've already set up the grains in the orientation that we like on top, so we need to keep track of these and try and keep them side by side. And you guessed it, another gluing montage. I know, right? It's the only thing holding this whole thing together. Now, I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over again, but it's really, really important at this stage to make sure all of those surfaces are evenly covered with glue. And now that we've got the whole surface covered, it's time to stand our pieces back up on end. Take your time and arrange the pieces in a repeating pattern. This is where you'll set your final pattern and get a sneak peek of what the finished board's going to look like. For this design, I'm going to offset the pieces slightly to try and add a little activity and accentuate the gradients to the area between the different woods. If you're making something like this for yourself, you definitely don't need to add this step. The beauty of this is that you're only limited by your imagination. Now, I've added a couple of clamping calls to the end of this one to try and evenly distribute the clamping force and make sure we get good even squeeze out. Alright, so it's the next day and we're out of clamps. Now, I'm not sure that this is the way that you should be doing this, but Mitre Saw does a really, really good job of trimming off those irregular edges. I can't cut the entire length of the board in one pass, but with a little bit of patience and cutting one side and then flipping to the other, we got it done. And now that we've got one square side, all we need to do is set our fence to the thinnest part of the board and run it through the table saw. While the Mitre Saw got us most of the way there, we still need to go back and clean up that edge, and now they're spot on. And back to the drum sander. Now, you definitely don't need one of these to do this project. It makes it a lot easier, but you can achieve the same result with a router sled or, with a lot of grit and determination, the old handheld belt sander. And onto the handheld sander. The drum sander does an excellent job of getting everything flat, but it leaves a lot of really deep scratch marks, all running in one direction. We need to use the orbital sander to smoothen everything out and to give it a more uniform finish. Even with the help of a drum sander, sanding end grains sucks. You gotta start at 80 grit, move your way up to 120, and then finally finish with 220. After all the sanding's done, we're going to add an 1/8 inch or 3mm round over to all the corners to make it nice and smooth to touch. Now before our final grit at 220, we need to wet the grain. Now what this does is it makes all the grains stand up on end, so when you knock them back down with the 220, the result is a really, really smooth chopping board that is far more resistant to water and doesn't go furry. And now time for the feet. We start by pre-drilling all the holes for the screws. Now this little set square that I have here, it has all these little marks. I'm just using that to keep a consistent spacing all the way around. And into our pre-drilled holes, we send the little screws home. And we're on the home stretch. We start the finishing process by adding a good amount of food-safe mineral oil. So you want to apply this liberally and let it sit for a little while and then wipe off the excess. I usually do 2 to 3 coats of mineral oil. And I need to stress, there are a lot of mineral oils out there. You need to make sure that the one that you're using is 100% food safe. In my experience, the best food safe finish is Carnauba beeswax finish. I use it on my knife handles and my chopping boards. You want to wipe it on liberally, let it set for a little while, and then buff to a nice luster. And there we are, all finished up. As mentioned at the start of the video, I've been using this board quite a lot before I took this shot. It's got some scars, but it's holding up really, really well. I'm really happy with the finished colours. The blackwood accentuated by the chestnut, and just look at the natural spectrum of colour in the blackwood. I hope it will serve me well for years to come. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like what you saw, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. Thanks guys, see you on the next one.